today we are here to talk about Dreamachine. Dreamachine is an immersive experience like no other. Dreamachine invites you on a magical journey to explore the extraordinary potential of your mind. The colourful world of Dreamachine will unfold behind your closed eyes, created by your own brain and completely unique to you. Created by Collective Act in collaboration with Turner Prize-winning artists Assemble, Grammy and Mercury-nominated composer John Hopkins, and a team of leading technologists, scientists, and philosophers. Hello, I'm Leigh Pontin. I'm Creative Director at Nexus Studios. We are one of the collaborators on Story Trails, which is part of Unboxed. Story Trails is a project that allows unique experiences to play out across the UK. We're enabling 15 new storytellers to create AR story trails using the magic of augmented reality. And Dreamachine, of course, is also part of Unboxed, which is a groundbreaking celebration of creativity taking place across the UK this year, created by some of the brightest minds in science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. Unboxed features 10 major multi-site and digital creative projects in the UK's most ambitious showcase of creative collaboration. So, I'd love these wonderful speakers to introduce themselves. We have Anil coming in remotely. I don't know whether it's possible to see him just yet.
I'm glad to join you remotely. My name's Anil Seth. I'm a professor of neuroscience at the University of Sussex, down the road in Brighton. And my research for many years has been about consciousness and perception and the self. And I'm the lead scientist on the Dreamachine project, working with other scientists and philosophers as part of the team.
Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm one of the founding members of Assemble, a kind of cross-disciplinary collective working across art, design and architecture. And I guess in this project has been kind of talking to Jen for about 2 years on and off, 2 years when we started, 4 years now. It's been quite a quick 18 months about, I guess, turning this initial idea into this kind of collective experience. I mean, we've got quite a lot of history working in kind of immersive kind of installations, but going up to also kind of community projects, organization development, so it seemed like quite a nice fit. Kind of coincidentally, I had built one of the first, the kind of primitive cardboard cutout version, the Brian Geisen original, when I was studying at university, so it was kind of amazing when we got the first email through and sort of knew where it was going, so that was kind of super exciting.
Wonderful. And do you think it might be possible to roll that video? Just have a look at the wonderful Dreamachine so people can get an idea.
One of the great joys of the Dreamachine project is that the scientific and the philosophical aspects have been built in from the very beginning. We're investigating a phenomenon that's still not widely understood, how flickering light generates this kaleidoscopic, vivid, immersive range of experiences for people.
So we're really making something that is internal and quite transcendental and personal into a collective experience. Because of the nature of the experience, we're hoping that what will really happen is that it will engender conversation. And so every stage of the Dreamachine has been designed in a way to really enable people to talk to each other.
This particular project is unlike anything because your eyes are closed and your brain is creating the visual. It's the first time I've actually composed something specifically to be played in a 360 dimensional sound. So that's allowed me to do much more than I've ever done. There are more sounds in there than I would put in a stereo track. So it's a little bit like moving from black and white to colour.
Being inside this thing is kind of magic. It completely sort of envelops you. It saw the entire universe go by behind my own closed eyes.
I saw colours that I haven't seen for years, vibrant, powerful, passionate colours. It was just absolutely, I found the whole experience absolutely fascinating.
I'd recommend it to anyone, regardless of their age, because they could get the same feeling.
Our brains are powerful. They are very powerful things. I would consider it a life-changing thing to go through, 100%.
That was a really great video. I hope people got a little flavour of it, what that feels like. Can I ask the audience, has anybody here been to Dreamachine yet? Please put your hands up if you've been. Oh, there's a couple. In the yes, there's a few. Okay, so it's good to know that. It's good to know so that we know the vast majority of people here haven't seen it. But so maybe it's time to give a little plug to it, because I went last week and it was incredible. I mean, somebody who was describing it there as being a kind of magic, and it is. I mean, how can you imagine an experience where you close your eyes and you have these kaleidoscopic experiences of colour with your eyes closed that are stimulated by your own brain? It's like your own brain is creating this stuff, and every single person that you speak to has a different experience of what they see. I don't want to tell you exactly what happens because I don't want to spoil the surprise for you, but you should all go and you should all experience this. I wonder whether, Jennifer, could you tell us about the origin of this wonderful experience and what your vision was for the piece?
Sure. So I'm going to jump around a bit and tell you the story of where it was first born. And it was an idea that was actually born from a feeling. And it was a feeling that I had at the back of the Royal Festival Hall in the South Bank Centre at a gig. And it was not coincidentally, a John Hopkins show in 2014. And it was a sold out gig. I was right at the back. So 2,000 people all in neat rows in front of me, a little bit like you are now. And for those of you who haven't seen John live, his sets veer from kind of very sort of quiet and ambient through to full-on rave, and he kind of builds it up and takes it on the journey. And for the first half of this concert, nobody was moving. So I was at the back and I could see all of these people completely transfixed by what was happening in front of them. And there was this sense of electricity in the room. So it was really, really kind of heady and atmospheric in there. But you couldn't see anything from the outside. It was just a feeling. And then one man at the end of our row stood up and started dancing. And the stewards kind of pounced on him and pulled him out and were like, don't dance. This is a seated venue. You can go back in if you sit down and behave yourself. They let him back in. He sat down and then stood up and started dancing again. And it was like someone chucked a match in the room. Like the entire hall erupted. Everyone ran down the front. Everyone was standing on their seats. And I guess what I kind of came away from that night feeling was like, what an extraordinary thing it is to experience when you have this really personal, deep kind of collective trance and you're sharing it with other people. And that moment just before it flipped, actually, just before everyone kind of stood out and lost control of themselves, was the most interesting bit for me. So that kind of feeling stayed with me. And 60 years before this, an artist called Brian Gyson, who was a Beat Generation artist and writer and poet and a collaborator with William Burroughs, was on a bus going down a really straight tree-lined road on a sunny day in France. And he was falling asleep against the window, so he had his eyes shut. And he described himself as entering this transcendental state and wrote this beautiful entry in his diary of the extraordinary colours and patterns in this kaleidoscopic world he entered, all with his eyes shut. And the minute the bus left the trees, it stopped. So he opened his eyes and it kind of had gone. And he thought he'd had some kind of apparition or spiritual encounter, was kind of completely transfixed by the beauty of this. Got back to London, discussed it with William Burroughs, his kind of collaborator at the time, who had just found out from William Gray Walter, a neuroscientist I'm sure Anil can tell you a bit more about, that this was actually a phenomena that occurs when you flicker white light on closed eyes. And it triggers this extraordinary reaction in the brain, which Kim talked a little bit about, and I'm sure Anil can talk about in a bit more detail in a minute. But essentially, you have this like light show inside your mind, all generated by your own brain. So Gyson thought this was completely remarkable and set about creating something he called the Dreamachine, which was really simple. It was a patterned cylinder, basically cardboard, that you put on a record player with holes in the side. You hang a light bulb inside, you press play on the record player, the cylinder spins and then creates the flicker at the right frequency to create this effect. And his vision was that this would replace the TV in every home in America, and that people would no longer accept kind of mass-produced commercial media, because what they'd be generating in their own heads would be far more interesting and exciting. And he, throughout the 60s, went around giving the pattern out to anybody and everybody who'd listen, was really trying to get this thing mass produced, but I think was dismissed as being like one of the waifs and strays of the Beat generation, so it never happened for him, and he literally died on his deathbed saying, "The Dream Machine, it changed the world." Fast forward, I don't know, however many years, and I found this book in a second-hand bookshop, and in the back, which I won't try and pull out now because it'll fall apart, is a pattern to make the Dream Machine. So I made one of these as a teenager, kind of experimented with it, and then forgot about it, essentially. And it was only after coming out of that gig, out of John's show, that I realised the potential that hadn't been realised through Geisson's original device, which was what would happen if you took this really incredible, personal, internal experience and made it into something that you could share collectively. And I was kind of really excited by what you could do by bringing music into that experience, so you had the two senses working together, and then taking the last 60 years of neuroscience since Geisson's kind of first discovery to make this like the most powerful, incredibly effective, transformative experience that we could create. So basically, I'm now going to condense this into a really short space of time, set on the very long path of finding all of the collaborators that could help bring this to life across the disciplines of architecture and art and music and neuroscience and philosophy and technologists and sound designers. So this incredible kind of interdisciplinary team to realise this, which was all kind of enabled, I guess, by the UNBOXED Commission. So yeah, it's kind of a journey in parts, and I feel like our Dream Machine is one dot in the history of time, and there'll be other kind of people inspired by this for the future.
That's so fascinating. God, what a great origin story. Anil, would we be able, I'm not sure where to look when I'm trying to look at you, but would it be possible for you to speak to us about the project from a neuroscience perspective and what your contribution was to the project?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, the first thing to say, it's just been an absolute privilege and joy to be part of this team where this interdisciplinary collaboration between science, art, music, architecture. Often these art-science collaborations are a little bit lip service, but in this case, it's totally different. It's been built into the project from the very start, and that's really unusual, and it's been an absolute thrill. But there is a neuroscientific backstory to this as well, and Jen mentioned a little bit of it. In my lab down at Sussex, my main interest for the last 15, 20 years has been about consciousness. This everyday miracle by which this lump of wetware inside your skull gives rise to an inner universe of rich experience. And we just take it for granted, right? You open your eyes and this world of color and shape and objects and people and places just pours itself in. But of course, it's not like that. The world out there is basically unknown, and our brain generates the experiences we have, which is related to the world. And so in my lab, we've been looking for a long time about ways to investigate this mystery of consciousness. And this phenomenon that's at the core of the Dream Machine is a very powerful example of this. It's this phenomenon by which flickering light on closed eyes gives rise to vivid visual experiences of color, of shape, of movement, and for some people, much else besides. And these colors and shapes are not literally there in the environment, but nonetheless, we experience them very vividly. So trying to figure out what's going on is a sort of really interesting window into this mystery of consciousness. But it's also one of the oldest phenomena in neuroscience too. Jan Perkinje, who was one of the founders of neuroscience in the 19th century, had described things like this phenomenon by waving his hands in front of his face while staring at the sun and seeing patterns of one sort or another. And then comes along William Gray Walter, one of my favorite figures in the history of neuroscience. In the 1950s, he was one of the pioneers of EEG. This is the technology many of us use to measure the tiny electrical signals generated by the brain while we perceive, while we think, while the brain is active. And he also tried out this, he got to know about this phenomenon of what he called stroboscopically induced visual hallucination, it's a long word for this flickering light on closed eyes, and started recording from the brain while people were having these experiences. And it was Brian Geison coming across Gray Walter's work that gave a lot of juice to his Dream Machine project. In a chapter, I happen to have it here, this wonderful 1953 book called The Living Brain, Walter has a chapter called called Revelation by Flicker, which is just the most wonderful title. So there's a whole chapter in one of the original neuroscience books about this phenomenon. But it still remained on the back burner in neuroscience too. Now, in my lab, we got hold of a stroboscopic light in about 10 years ago with my colleague David Schwartzman, who's part of the team. And we started investigating it more as a back burner project, and it remained that way for many years. Absolutely fascinating to figure out what was going on. And what we found is basically what's already known to some extent, which is that the flickering light entrains rhythms in your brain. Our brain is always oscillating. And one of the prominent oscillations is called the alpha rhythm, which is at about 10 hertz, and it's very prominent over the visual cortex. And indeed, it increases in amplitude when you close your eyes and when you're relaxed. And the strobe light, it's most effective at around these frequencies, and it does sort of mesh with the intrinsic rhythmicity of your brain, and it amplifies these oscillations. That's one thing that's going on. Quite why that generates visual hallucinations is unclear. The other thing that's going on is that it seems in some sense your brain is not expecting visual input, yet its visual cortex is being activated. And I think the best way I can have of explaining my hypothesis here, and this is not just mine, many's, is that normally we use our visual cortex, we see through it out to the world. But when it's activated in this fashion, it's almost as if the brain is looking at itself. It's almost as if the intrinsic wiring of the visual cortex, its structure, is revealing itself in the medium of our own conscious experience. So just to wrap it up, I mean, what I didn't at all think about, and we hadn't thought about in doing this research, is the other things that Dreamachine bring to the party, which is making it a collective experience, bringing the music in, bringing the architecture in. And that really transforms it from what is a powerful but still kind of lab-based curiosity into, I think, a real powerful cultural phenomenon. And what we're finding with people who go through the Dreamachine is it does ignite their curiosity and wonder about the brain, about the philosophy and science of perception and the mind. And of course, everybody has a different experience. And for us, this is super interesting. So we've worked to help design and build it, but as scientists and philosophers, we're also getting a lot of fantastic data, what people experience. We've worked with digital designers to provide ways where people can describe or represent their experiences in interactive graphical form. And there's a larger whole part of the Dreamachine project, well, not a larger, but other parts of the Dreamachine project, like the perception census, which we're launching in July, which is going to try and understand much more about how we all see the world differently, not just in the Dreamachine, but like here and now. We will have different experiences of color and shape. We have different inner worlds, even if that's not obvious. So this is, from a scientific perspective, a wonderful journey and a springboard to a lot more in the future.
Oh, that's so exciting. I loved everything you were bringing up there. It's just so fascinating. And I mean, speaking of the design and build that you were talking about at the end, I wonder, Anthony, whether we could hear about your perspective from an architecture and experience design perspective. What did you bring to the experience?
Thanks. I mean, so I guess the role as an architect, you're a perennial jack of all trades. So you're relying on the kind of input, the technical input, the specific input of everyone, but the kind of spaces where it all comes together. And kind of echo what Anil said, it was been really rewarding for us because, again, we play lip service to science, and if you go to architecture schools and education, but actually having it done in a really rigorous way is a different world, and that was kind of fascinating for us. I guess, as Jen touched on, the project starting point was that this effect is hugely powerful, but by turning that into a collective experience, that would actually be kind of enhance it. It would make the most of this. But when we started, that was really conjecture. Like, we didn't really know, and so the journey was thinking about how we could go from that kind of powerful idea within a very short time period into the kind of installation as it is. The Dreamachine is unique in that it's highly personal, can be quite profound for people. People have quite strong emotions, generally positive, but profound. You're kind of shaken in a good way, and that's quite a rare thing for strangers to do in a public setting. And so for us, the key design driver was how you made a space that was safe, warm, comfortable, but that also it had a real presence. It needed to instill the correct atmosphere, and I guess with lots of these experiences, the set and setting is important. If you look at lots of the writing around kind of psychedelics and all these other things, like set and setting is this kind of critical thing. You have to be in the right brain space to have an experience that is kind of rewarding. And so we were looking at, I guess, a good spatial analogy was the Japanese onsen or like Korean spa. So these kind of, they're quite ambiguous spaces where you're able to find your own way, but at the same time have a real aesthetic and a real presence and a real beauty to them. So what the kind of design challenge was working up from this kind of individual experience at the Brian Geisen and as Anna was talking about in the lab into this kind of many-faceted, multiple kind of larger group experience. As a starting point, we looked at kind of quite a wide range of different precedents. So from the world of moot halls or moot mounts, kind of early democratic settings for conversation, looking at kind of ritual and ceremonial spaces, kind of internationally, looking a lot at art and sculpture. So Richard Serra or Piloty Rist were really kind of influential in the kind of presence, both of these kind of ambiguous, quite beautiful structures, but that weren't identifiable to any particular culture or religion, or we didn't want any obvious symbols of any particular thing, and kind of the kind of ambiguous space of Joseph Beuys and his kind of feltscapes. So we start with that, but then the critical tool for development was really working through a series of very large-scale one-to-one prototyping, starting with kind of the earliest assumptions about spatial orientation, where you are as an audience member versus the source of light, whether it was a kind of show, whether it was something that was always on, so kind of really early testing out that, through to much more kind of refined testing about the lumbar support on your back, the feeling of the fabric, you want to, how that tactility was.
So comfy.
And I guess what that enabled was, as a tool, meant that it could be a really responsive and really collaborative process. So these big moments of kind of collective endeavor, where each of us individually working away at the things that we were focusing on, but then these prototypes enabled the entire team to come together and see the work as a whole thing. And I guess as it's all been discussed, the experience is kind of interdependent and like contingent. It builds up. The layers build up to create the overall experience. It's not just about the lights and the sounds, and each individual on their own are amazing, but together they are much more than the sum of their parts. And so the kind of prototype was really the only way of enabling that, and also being able to get kind of a huge amount of public feedback. I think Dev, who was the kind of one of the technologists behind the project, described it as like, we've been given this tool, but we have no manual, we don't know how to drive it, we have no instructions, we don't know what the levers are. And so actually getting a lot of people through it was a really important way of trying to tune it somewhat. And it's still, I think, as Anil said, we still don't fully understand everything about it, and things still often happen that we have no idea, but at least enabled us to have a better understanding of if we do this or that this will happen.
The opposite of what you think will happen, basically.
Generally.
Every time.
Yeah, and like you'll be in the room and someone will be like, that was way brighter, and someone will be like, that was way darker. And you're like, what? Like, anyway.
There's a phrase, designing in the dark, that we've given this.
And then, so the kind of final end result was, I guess, a design that tries to incorporate the whole journey. So you come in, your shoes and your earthly belongings are taken away from you. We felt it was really important that you kind of left the urbane world behind, that you're kind of put in a kind of slightly reverential setting, like temple-like, but not religious. Brought in to the kind of main performance space, but not quite the right word. I mean, the main space. The nomenclature often failed you with a project like this, which is in the round. So you're in a kind of full circle. The idea being it's a kind of democratic space. You're close to other people, but equally you're not face to face. You have your own space while being kind of present. And that's where this kind of main experience happens. So the lights, the 360 sound from John Hopkins in this kind of reclined kind of setting. And then following that, you're kind of let out into a space of kind of decompression and reflection. So the important thing, we didn't want to just kind of thrust people back out in the world. We had this moment to kind of come together, talk about your experience, share your experience, think about your experience. And that's where some of these kind of digital tools that Anil was talking about start coming in. So there's this kind of amazingly beautiful kind of representation called the data visualization that is about trying to amalgamating the information coming out of it. There's a kind of a large table that people can draw their experience, and in the video you saw some of them, they are universally extraordinary. And I think it's really, there's something nice, the experience is ineffable and it's very hard to put into language. So the drawing has proved like an amazing tool about people. There's an inherent imperfection in the drawing that allows people, I think, just to have a go, and as a result, they're kind of extraordinary. So you have this kind of period of time before you kind of gather up your belongings and kind of released back out into the world. And Jen was saying on the way here that we have like multiple stories of people like missing their train or just like wandering off and getting kind of lost a bit.
Lost in London.
And then suddenly being like, oh yeah, shit, I had something else to do. So that, it's maybe worth saying that we still think of the installation as it is now is another prototype.
Yeah.
You know, anything that takes 18 months to develop of this complexity and this many elements happening in is only ever going to be, 3/4 of the way there. And I think it's kind of really exciting also to see kind of what the life after this version is.
I mean, it's a wonderful prototype. I felt as if I was on a super comfy intergalactic spaceship that was touring some kind of communal mind. It was, I had such a great time on it. But Jennifer, I wondered whether, so this idea of the collective versus the individual, or not versus even seems like the wrong word now.
They're both true.
They're both true. They're at the same time.
Yeah.
What do you think Dreamachine has to offer? What can society learn from Dreamachine?
So much. And I guess bouncing off what both Anil and Anthony have just said, we're also only just scratching the surface of what's possible here. But it's kind of really clear, I guess, that immersive experiences are a bit of a zeitgeist right now. You know, that word is everywhere, kind of sick of seeing it, if I'm honest, and we're describing ourselves as that. And they're often about kind of scale and spectacle, and the technology is the focus. And I guess what we're doing with Dreamachine is inverting this, and our design intention was actually to make the technology totally invisible. The technology isn't the story here, you're the story, the person going through it is the story, and that power and focus therefore stays with the audience. And I think what that is resulting in actually is the impact of the project is people are having really profound experiences, and it seems to be that we've kind of tapped into a need for people to reconnect to themselves as well as reconnecting to each other. So the extraordinary space that, sorry, you've got your hand up, I just noticed. Are you okay?
We're gonna have some questions. Yes, we are going to have some questions. Yes.
So yeah, the space which Anthony was describing, which Assemble have designed with real care and intent, provides this really rare opportunity for you to kind of detach from the outside world, detach from devices, detach from the kind of constant bombardment that is, everyday life, and just listen to yourself. And so the experiences that we're seeing from the public, range from joy. We have what we call the grinners, which is people just literally laughing all the way through to really actually some deep sadness and grief when people have had a chance to kind of listen to themselves and reconnect to that. And I think that's a really important learning that, clearly we don't have enough of those spaces. For this to be happening within a couple of weeks of us opening the doors, in their thousands, we've had over 12,000 people through now, and this is a really kind of common and phenomena that we're seeing is really important. I think we need to listen to that, and giving audiences a sense of agency in this and remembering them in the journey rather than it always being about the kind of artist or the technology or the something that's over there. It's actually kind of all in here, and that's what the Dreamachine is showing you. It's kind of, without getting too sort of hippie about it, it's showing you yourself. What you're seeing in there is yourself, and this vast world that is within you. It's not external, it's internal.
That's just so fascinating. I'm just going to ask Anil one question, then I'll open it out to the audience. When you're saying that it's yourself, Anil, you said earlier that you're kind of seeing your own. It's the brain looking at itself, and I found that just a fascinating idea. It was because for me, when I was in there with your eyes closed, it felt like I was getting a universal input with the lights, and then my brain was closing the circuit, and I wondered, what's going on? Please tell us what's happening?
It's probably something like that. That is still in the realm of hypothesis. That's not established fact about what's going on. But there are certain clues that something like that is happening in the nature of the thing. While everybody does have different experiences, and while, as Jen and Nancy were saying, there are often very profound emotional, cognitive aspects to it as well. People's sense of time changes. People's sense of where they are in space can change also. there are a lot of similarities to the basic visual phenomena in terms of vivid colors, geometric patterns, and so on. And these kinds of visual experiences are not unique to Dreamachine type events. They happen in some other kinds of hallucinations as well. And there's been quite a long tradition of trying to link these geometric patterns to the wiring of the visual cortex. And one of the things we're doing in the lab is trying to advance that work too, by building simulations of the visual cortex and then sort of perturbing them, like giving them an artificial strobe light and seeing what happens, seeing if we can model computationally the kinds of things that people are reporting in their own experience. So that's what I mean by the brain looking at itself. But I think that the really powerful thing for me that came out of it, and that is still coming out of it, is precisely that it's this not you looking at something out there. And to be very specific, you're not looking at a screen. Like so much of what goes on, you're looking at me now. Unfortunately, I'm on a screen. This is disappointing for everyone. But much of our lives are spent where the content that we consume, whether it's media, whether it's work-based, it's all through screens. And Dreamachine was described by somebody as non-Instagrammable, and I really like that. It is for you. People can replicate it in images, in drawing to some extent. But I think if you do have a chance to experience it, there is no way to fully capture the range and breadth and the depth of what people experience. Just to give you one thing that astonished me, and in the lab for years now that we've been working on this, your visual field seems to go round the back of your head for some people. And what's going on there? I don't know what's going on there. But that just in itself is quite extraordinary. And it just, all of these things push against us taking the way we experience the world in itself for granted, because it just shows us this wider space of possible mental states that we might inhabit.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to questions now. Would you like to speak first, lady in the scarf?
Thank you so much, and apologies for my enthusiasm. So first of all, I'm just so inspired, and thank you so much for providing such a framework. I'll just briefly introduce. So I'm a neuroscience PhD student, and I research peripheral interfaces and belief updating in embodied mixed reality. So very inspired. We have a company, and we're making digital remote healthcare, focusing in a similar way, individual and collective experiences in embodied virtual selves, where you look at yourself, but it's more focused on movement. So inspired around so many things. But my question for you, just the way that it's an opportunity to have patient, like person-centered inclusion in the creation of a research project that is doing so many things on so many different levels, like changing, perhaps, or giving an opportunity to experience a change in a root model thing, that the brain is like a prediction engine, or it's hallucinating, or your brain is creating it, so incredible to have that shared in a way that's embodied and conversational. And I guess I wondered if you had any sort of research projects in and around the ways in which that's changing or could have an impact on communities, or how you have people coming back to the space, or measuring group dynamics within the space, whether that be between things like heart rate variabilities, group synchronizations, group experiences, and then the effects of this in community, right? So building spaces that people can enter, maybe many of them, not necessarily huge, some small, just questions around that specific aspect of it, because it's so related to community, and is something I'm particularly just so curious, because that's sort of where we are, and how do we do that, and just to hear any further thoughts, and apologies for such a long question.
Who would like to answer that?
Shall I dive in a bit and then maybe bounce around? So, really great to hear all of that, and community is at the heart of this, and maybe just to briefly tell you where this is. So this is taking place in each capital city in the UK, and in each city we're in formerly public buildings that have either fallen into disrepair or aren't being used at the moment. So in London we're in Woolwich Public Market, which is a 1930s market in the High Street, fallen into disrepair, but we've kind of brought it back to life. We're also in a temple, a church, and an ice rink, so completely different locations, and in each one of those locations the Dreamachine Dreamachine completely kind of inhabits that building and is a world that you enter. And why I'm mentioning that in relation to community is that that was really intentional in the audience that we invite into this, and that, you know, we really literally throw the doors open and say, you will never have heard of this, you might not know what on earth we're talking about, but come in and see it for yourself, try it for yourself. And I think that is what is leading to some of the really profound experiences we're seeing, which is that people are coming in without expectation and, you know, really kind of curious, and then are being revealed something really powerful and profound about their own minds and about their own potential, and that has huge impact for what this could do in future. So I think we're only just scratching the surface, actually, of what the kind of social and well-being potential is, but we are seeing it every single day. We are seeing the incredible impact of this. In terms of the research potential of that, Anil, I'll pass to you, but there are so many things that we could be watching and observing and strapping people to, and, you know, monitoring, and I think, again, that's all for the future.
That's right. I mean, one of the things that we were very keen as a team is that it shouldn't feel like a scientific experiment for the point of view of people going through it. So we don't strap them to EEG machines or heart rate monitors or anything like that. It's all about their own experience. Even the reflection zone, the abilities people have to describe what they experience, that's sort of designed to be part of their own journey rather than simply providing data for us. But having said that, yes, there's lots of things we'd like to do. We can do them to a limited extent in the lab. And one of the things we're doing is, with sort of a subset of participants, we're hoping to follow them in a more longer term way. So actually send them some more detailed surveys before and after the Dreamachine, to see how their wider thoughts about themselves, about perception, consciousness, community has changed as a result, and whether anything sort of sticks after some time. Because anecdotally, based on the profundity of what some people experience in the Dreamachine, I think it does have the potential to have quite some lasting impact. And the challenge is, as I think you know, is finding the right ways to get a research handle on that. It's not so easy, but there is a huge amount of potential there for sure.
Yeah, and we've got psychologists and anthropologists all kind of queuing up to go, let us on this project, let us observe this more closely.
Should we have, would you like to? Yeah. Sorry, there's probably time for 2 more questions after this, I think.
This one is for Dr. Anil. I work in AI research, so understanding how cognitive abilities of humans are combined to create AI is what I do. And outside of work, I'm learning to meditate for the last 4 to 5 years. So this question I've been meaning to ask a neuroscientist for a long time, and possibly that's why I don't get invited by neuroscientists very much. So the question is, we know what the brain is, we know where the brain is, and in your study of consciousness, we don't have answers to the question what the mind is, where it is. We've not been able to quantify that, describe that fully enough. So why hasn't it been so hard? Are you working on it? Is the community working on it? And when will we get answers to this? That's my question.
That's a pretty challenging question. I can't give you an answer to it. I think you've just described the overall challenge of psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and a number of other disciplines. My own view is the mind is what the brain does. It's not a thing that is anywhere or is identical to any piece of physical stuff. I mean, many of you, the audience, might know this idea of the extended mind. My colleague and friend Andy Clark. Where does the mind end? It doesn't end at the skull. The body is part of the mind. Increasingly, my phone and computer are part of my mind. The mind is a process. It's not a thing. And how the mind relates to the brain, well, that's the real challenge. And I think, just to bring it a little bit back to the Dreamachine, that's one of the great sort of outcomes of it, is that we often take our brains and our minds for granted. And what we've seen pretty much universally in people coming through is it challenges that taking for granted, and they start asking exactly the same sorts of questions that you just asked there. What is my mind? How does it work? What is my relationship between my mind and others and the world around us? And to ignite that curiosity, I think, is going to be, firstly, in itself, it's a wonderful thing, because it's just a miracle that happens every day. And the more we recognize how amazing it is to have a mind and to have conscious awareness, I think that's enriching for life in a way that meditation can also be enriching for life too. But it's also going to be inspiring for many other people to find their own answers to that very broad question.
Oh, that's a good answer. Gentleman with the tattoos.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the enlightening talk. I work as a researcher in Middle Eastern studies, but as a night job, I'm a perfumer, so I make perfumes. And I was thinking if you've ever considered introducing the smell element in the whole picture, because you have the light, which is prominent, you have the music, and you have the tactile, but you don't have, I haven't heard it mentioned. So, that's my question, basically.
You got applause for the question.
Oh, yeah, good question. Excellent question.
Yeah, we thought about it, and we loosely experimented really poorly with some incense sticks in various prototypes, but I think we thought it was perhaps just one thing too many. I don't know if you want to add to that, Anthony, but... Basically,
the short answer is yes, we would like to. We were struck, in the sense that I was talking about before, it's like there were so many unknowns at the beginning, had to try and limit them somewhat to be able to make any sort of progress. So I think it would be super interesting as a kind of next set. And there was lots of conversation about whether we could have also something performative, like the idea of the smoke and the way that moves in the space. I think trying to keep that kind of analog feeling was really important. And yeah, exactly, it would be, smell is so primary in your experience. But we just didn't get there in this period.
Any more? Somebody? I feel like I should get somebody further back. I'm sorry, I keep getting everybody at the front. Man with the white. Yes, that one. Sorry.
It's been an amazing talk. Thank you very much. Please tell me that the finale of this is going to be you turning the lights down and making these lights flicker so we can all experience it.
Yes.
Is it not? I literally thought they were
flashlights.
strobe lights up at the front. They're not. Oh, it's a shame. I'll have to come to the place in Woolwich, though. Thank you very much. Really nice talk.
Thank you. Oh, this lady here then.
Oh, this way. So you've mentioned a couple of times things like set and setting, and it sounds to me like Dreamachine is very similar to the most beautiful parts of, say, a psilocybin experience. So I'm curious to know whether you're looking, particularly at Anil, whether you're looking at how you can see the comparison between Dreamachine and psychedelics and use that as a way to study the physical manifestation of consciousness.
Got 40 seconds, Anil.
A very good question, thanks. Okay, so firstly, we've deliberately steered away from the potential parallel between psychedelics and the Dreamachine in our descriptions of it. People will make their own connection. The Guardian reviewed it as the close to state-funded psychedelics as you can get. There are some parallels. There are also some big differences, and I think the differences are where it gets interesting. Short answer is absolutely. So in my lab as well, we've been analyzing brain data from people under various psychedelic conditions and trying to build sort of more granular models of the different kinds of experiences that different psychedelics produce, along with other different kinds of hallucinations, such as in Parkinson's disease, in psychosis, and now in the Dreamachine. So we have this very broad space of, you might call it, non-normative experience. And the more sort of flags we can put in this territory, I think the better handle we'll have on how conscious perception in normal life also appears, by understanding how these different experiences all differ. And that's exactly what one of our long-term goals is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Anil. I can't see your face anymore because we have a big red 0 that says we've run out of time. You've been a wonderful audience. You have been a wonderful panel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.